Hey everyone, it's Sherry with Squatchable, and today's report is about a man who says that he knows Bigfoot is real. And why? Because he accidentally killed one. It's a very bizarre, interesting, fascinating. It's a story that most people haven't heard of. The report we're going to talk about is report number 9552 with the BFRO. And this one is a little bit different. Most reports on BFRO are self-reported, but this particular one is different. It was submitted by researcher Kurt Nelson. Nelson spent a lot of time discussing this incident with a man named Peter over the phone and in person. The report Nelson submitted to the BFRO was, for the most part, a transcript from his face-to-face interviews with Peter. In this story is Peter's story, a man who accidentally killed a Bigfoot. The location of where this happened was near Gibsonville in Manitoba, Canada, about 15 miles west of Gibsonville, just southeast of Basket Lake. This area has some sightings reported there, about 31 sightings, 19 of them are Class A. That means most of the sightings that happen there, people actually see it. At the time that this incident happened, it was probably pretty unpopulated. It's basically polar bear land. It's basically a wild bush country, lots of little lakes everywhere. It's a very lacy looking map if you're looking at it, with all the little lakes that are in this whole province in Canada, in Manitoba. So it's understandable why there may not be a whole lot of reports coming out of this area. This occurrence happened in November of 1941, and he reported the day as being kind of midday, clear conditions, and patchy snow on the ground. And this area at the time of the accidental killing of the Bigfoot, it was very thick brush. This encounter happened prior to several large fires that came through and cleared out a lot of the excess brush that was in the area. So at the time this happened, it was basically a lot of trees, bushes, and stuff like that, all just kind of mushed up together in there, making it kind of hard to see through there. So when Peter was 17, he went out hunting for moose with two of his friends around Basket Lake. His friends went to the east side of the lake, while Peter went by himself on the west side. The patchy snow was making it difficult to track, but eventually he located a cow moose with no calf in the brush and willows, eating with its head down. He knew he wouldn't be able to get a clearer view, so he took the shot towards the chest through the brush. It ended up not being a clean shot though, and merely wounded the moose. The moose took off, and Peter tracked her for about half an hour. He could see a blood trail here and there, and he believed he was on the right trail. Eventually, he saw a lot of hair in the willows again, about 45 yards away, so he thought he had found the moose again. It looked like the rear end of a moose, and he took a second shot, and it disappeared from view, indicated that he had succeeded in killing it. He approached it slowly just in case the moose was still alive, and as he got closer though, he realized this was not a moose lying on the ground. According to the interview, Peter said, "I nudged him in the foot and slowly walked on this side, still hanging onto my rifle like I was supposed to, and I picked the hand up with my right foot to see the bottom, and I walked around and I could see where I hit him, in the back, high in the back, between the shoulder blades, right in the back. It must have been bent over to look at the moose track in the blood or something like that." In the interview that followed, he gave a description of what the creature looked like. He said that he assumed it was a male because it didn't have obvious female parts, and the way it was lying, the nether regions were covered. He said it was between 7.5 to 8 feet tall with a huge round chest. There was only a little bare skin on the side of the face. It also did not appear to have ears. And he also said the palm of his hands were bare and dirty, 5 fingers, heavy fingers, and big palms and opposable thumbs. The soles of his feet were also bare and dirty with 5 toes. The foot looked very flat, about 15 to 15.5 inches long. It looked like it was covered with hair, not fur, and with no undercoat. It had the straggly look of long hair. On the head, shoulders, and arms, the hair was 6 to 8 inches long. The hair on top of the hands and part of the fingers was about 1 inch long. The hair on the legs was about 5 to 6 inches and went down onto the feet. It was a dirty dark brown with a reddish overtone. Now, this encounter took place well before the Patterson-Gimlin film, so Bigfoot wasn't common knowledge for most people at the time. He was at the scene of the incident no more than 8 minutes. Peter thought, "Holy God, what the heck am I gonna do now? If there's any more of these things, I don't want to be here." Peter was also concerned about being prosecuted for killing this creature. He was hunting moose illegally at that time, but he had 10 siblings that needed food for the winter. A large moose was irresistible. On top of that, there were stories about men who were hermits living in the bush. He did not want to be charged with killing a hermit or something human if that's what this creature was. There are also additional and very valid reasons why, during the time this happened, post-World War I and during World War II, Peter would not have wanted to draw attention to this event. During this time, there was open prejudice against immigrants from the Ukraine, Germany, and Austria and Canada. During World War I, Canada was at war with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and some immigrants who came from Austria-Hungary, which included many ethnic Ukrainians, were placed in 24 internment camps in Canada until 1920, just 21 years before this event occurred. Around 80,000 other immigrants weren't forced into camps but were registered as enemy aliens. Then World War II happened, and in the early years of the war, many Austrians were integrated into the German military units. Peter's father was an Austrian immigrant. At this time, Peter was a 17-year-old young man who was hunting moose illegally when he accidentally shot and killed a man-like creature in a time period before most people had ever heard of Bigfoot. That happened to be Austrian during a time of extreme prejudice against people of his background. Talking about it wasn't an option. He did say to Kurt Nelson, the researcher that was taking down this report, that he wishes he'd seen it alive. And he was a Bigfoot enthusiast for the rest of his life after that. It was also mentioned in the interview that in the years since, with all the hunting and time in the bush he spent, he never saw another one. Along with this report, a Canadian artist named Pat Barker did a painting of what Peter had seen when he accidentally killed this Bigfoot. So looking at this painting here, you can see what Peter had seen when he accidentally shot this Bigfoot. And when you look at this creature laying here on the ground, there's no way that this was a moose. Look at the details on this. I mean, 5 fingers here, the opposable thumb, the toes there, the feet. It looks like a human-like creature. And remember, this is 1941. Patty wasn't filmed at this time. There's no internet. If there's a newspaper out there, it's highly unlikely that they have a section that says, "Hey, regular Bigfoot sightings here." There likely wouldn't be any reports coming out of there for people to hear that's going over the telephone. "Hey, did you hear about a Bigfoot kidnapping someone?" That kind of stuff it would not spread back then because it's an isolated area. And this is really a low-tech time period, and they're in a rather inhospitable part of the North American continent to live in. I mean, I know there are some that are more inhospitable, but this area is one that I probably wouldn't do too well in, to be honest. And looking at this painting here, I mean, put yourself in his shoes. He was a 17-year-old Austrian boy at a time when Austrian people were not treating them nicely up there. And you're out there hunting illegally. Remember, he would not have known about Bigfoot at this time. So you shoot this creature, you know that there's hermits out there. For all he knows, this could be Hairy Hermit Joe, who's been hiding in the brush for 20-something years, and you shoot this person because you didn't know it was a Bigfoot. You shoot this person by accident, and you're already a person that's of a ethnicity that people don't like. That's a death sentence. I mean, I don't know if Canada would really go that far, but you know, sometimes mobs happen, especially in wartime. I mean, this happened during World War II. And what's amazing is that Peter was able to describe it in such great detail. And the researcher, Nelson, he said that he has no doubt that Peter was telling the truth. He said that he was very consistent in his description this whole time. I mean, this happened so many years ago, and at the time this interview was done, I think it was about 60 years prior that this had occurred. So this was seared into his mind, this event and what had happened out there. And this here is a picture of Peter, and you know, you kind of can't see him. I almost have a feeling with the way that Nelson had presented the report, Peter may not be his actual name, because it was in the start of the report, it was put in quotation marks. And usually you do that if you're trying to give somebody a alternative name to disguise who they are. And unless you kind of can't see his face, but at the time that this interview was done, this is Peter, the man who accidentally killed a Bigfoot when he thought it was the rear end of a moose that he was already tracking and had wounded. Now, in the interview, he said that he never saw one again during all of his time out there hunting and living in the bush out there. Do you think that maybe that's because this individual here was killed and the other members of their group decided that they needed to get out of the area, so basically they evacuated the area? Another thing though is that, like I mentioned previously, there was a lot of brush fires that happened in the area, so maybe it just became not as much of a suitable habitat for Bigfoots to remain in the area. So what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that the group of creatures that were living there decided to evacuate the area, or do you think it just became inhospitable afterwards? When I was going over this report, I actually really heavily reduced it down to just the bare bone facts, but there's a lot of details in there. I hope I didn't miss any. If you see any, let us know. But it's an interesting interview, and read researcher Nelson's side notes as he went through this interview with Peter. But it is a big read, and when I printed it out, it was about 12 pages worth of interview that I summarized down into this short amount here. And if you're really interested in it, I definitely highly recommend it. So we'll make sure to leave a link to the original report in the description section of the video, so that way if you're interested, you can check it out. Also, this story was summarized as well in Dr. John Bindernagel's book, The Discovery of Sasquatch: Reconciling Culture, History, and Science in the Discovery Process. It was in there as well, if you wanted to read it there too. So what do you think of this report? Have you guys seen this painting here? I know when I did an image search, I saw it pop up a few times, but it was mostly on blogs that no longer exist, and so when I clicked on the link, it went nowhere. And it seems like this is just kind of faded away into the background. It almost seems like a lot of people, they don't really recall this report, and a lot of people, they haven't seen it. So that's why we decided to go ahead and bring it up. But if you have heard it, and if you know of any other details that we missed, definitely let us know if you haven't seen this image. And what do you think of the creature right here? I mean, in the description it says that it was definitely hair. And it was actually kind of funny reading the interview with the researcher. Nelson was trying to really pinpoint down, how do you know this is hair? And it was funny because Peter was like, it's hair. To him, it was clearly and absolutely hair, not fur, with no undercoat. He made that really clear in the interview. But what do you think when you see this? Does this look like hair to you, or does it look more like fur? And also, if you were in Peter's position, I mean, how would you feel about this event? I mean, it's tough to put yourself in that kind of position because we've been lucky enough that, you know, if you're here in the US, we haven't had an internment camp since World War II. And in Canada, I think that, you know, World War I was last time they had internment camps. Yeah. And also, what would you do if you were in Peter's position? I mean, my goodness, for us, we're so far disconnected from the kind of concerns that he would have had back then. And what do you guys think? If you were in Peter's position, I mean, how would you feel? He had a lot of very valid concerns about why he needed to not discuss this and why he needed to just let this event kind of go away and fade away. He didn't want to bring other people in to see this and for this to be attached to him, especially with the fact that his family was Austrian at a time that Austrian people were really just largely had a negative view put on them by the people in the area due to the wars. You know, for him, he had additional things to deal with beyond the normal ridicule that we hear that people who witness or encounter a Bigfoot goes through. And like I mentioned as well, he did become a huge Bigfoot enthusiast. He wanted to know more about these creatures. He always wished that he'd seen one alive. He didn't do this on purpose. It was an accident. He was hunting for food for his family, and he thought he was looking at the rear end of the moose, which, if you look at this is probably what he saw here, considering where the bullet went there. And this creature was probably looking down at the ground at the blood and moose tracks, and he took the shot thinking that this was the rear end of the moose, and it ended up hitting the creature right there. So it was probably mostly leaned down, but maybe just a little bit. And that's how this creature ended up getting shot. So it was an accident. He did not mean to do this. He didn't go out into the woods saying, you know, I'm going to hunt a Bigfoot today. No, he was out there to feed his family, and this accidentally happened. So give us your thoughts on what you think about this report, and we'll see you in the comments down below. Bye!